So good afternoon, Nicole. Good afternoon, Nathan. This
Good
afternoon,
afternoon, sir.
proceed with knowing how a corporate organization is structured. We are also going to talk about investments. So allow me to share to you a screen that contains the discussion this afternoon for a while. Wait. Share screen. Share screen. Can you both see this?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
So
sir.
we have corporate organization structure and investments. We have this diagram. So our owners in a corporate organization, our owners are our shareholders and board of directors. Our managers are our president and the VPs. The president, known as the chief executive officer, and then you have the VP for marketing, VP for finance, production, and administration. So these are the areas in a corporate organization that also need a particular head or representation to communicate to the president matters, significant matters, especially business matters. And then as we start from the top, we have a set of shareholders, and then they elect the board of directors. The board of directors appoints the president, and the president has 4 people to support him in the operation of the business. You have the VP for marketing, VP for finance, VP for production, and the VP for administration. Uy, internet connection is unstable. Um, can you still hear me there?
Yes, sir.
What about,
Yes, sir.
allow me to raise that concern because since this morning we've been experiencing a lot of internet issues here.
Yeah, that one.
Shareholders, as said, they elect the board of directors. Each share is equal to 1 voting right. Since the board of directors is elected by the shareholders, their responsibility is to carry out the objective. The board of directors' responsibility is to carry out the objectives of the shareholders. Otherwise, they would not have been elected for that position. By the way, it's also possible that some shareholders may take part in the board of directors. However, there are also cases where the members of the board of directors are really external or outside in the pool of shareholders to avoid possibilities of conflict of interest. The board of directors is considered to be the highest policy-making body in an organization or in a corporation. And their primary responsibility is to ensure that the corporation is operating to serve the best interest of the stockholders. Take note, the board of directors has been elected by the shareholders. It is the prime objective of the board of directors that their policies, the tasks that they'll do, or the performances that they'll show would match the best interest to cater to the stock or shareholders. The responsibilities of the board of directors include setting policies. It's a policy-making body, so they set policies on investments, capital structure, and dividend policies. Dividend policies that has something to do with, that was also mentioned last time. Dividend policies have something to do with how wealth can be maximized among shareholders. Familiar with that question? Familiar with that goal? Wealth maximization. It's
Yes, sir.
also the responsibility of the board of directors to approve company strategies, goals, and budgets. They appoint and remove members of the top management, including the president. Since the board of directors can appoint or has the task of appointing the president, they can remove the president from the structure as well, or the person placed in that position from the structure. Or they can also remove the person appointed as vice president. They can do that because they're the board of directors. They have also the responsibility of determining top management's compensation, like how much should this bracket of workers be worth paying. They also have the responsibility of approving the information and other disclosures reported in the financial statements. So by the time financial reports are submitted or are shown, the board of directors have also some power when it comes to the disclosure and approval of these financial information. Like, we go now to the next person, or to the person appointed by the president. Appointed by the board of directors. We have here the chief executive officer, also known as the president, whose responsibilities are overseeing the operations of a company and ensuring that the strategies as approved by the board are implemented as planned. So we have here a person who is placed there to make sure that the policies provided by the highest policy-making body, the board of directors, have been carried out, have been implemented as how these policies have been planned. The president performs all areas of management. That would be planning, organizing, staffing, directing, and controlling. The president, or the CEO, also represents the company in professional, social, and civic activities. There are names of shareholders and board of directors do not necessarily come out when it comes to participants of civic, professional, and social activities. The ones who are made to go to these activities would be the chief executive officer or the president of a corporation. Then we have another person. You have the vice president for marketing. Responsibilities include formulating marketing strategies and plans, directing and coordinating company sales, performing market and competitor analysis, analyzing and evaluating the effectiveness and cost of marketing methods applied, and lastly, conducting or directing research that will allow the company to identify new marketing opportunities. Anything that pertains to the marketing world, even to the point of promoting good relationships with customers and distributors, these are in the fields of, or in the responsibility of the vice president for marketing. Let's consider this: promoting good relationships with customers and distributors. The vice president should make sure that the corporation or organization finds ways to maintain a good relationship between them and the customers or clients or distributors of their products and or services. This is to ensure that the organization or corporation lives longer, or else they will not. If they ignore having good relationships with customers and distributors, they might as well say their goodbye of their goal of wealth maximization. We have the vice president for production as the next vice president to assist the CEO. Responsibilities of the vice president for production: ensuring production meets customer demands, identifying production technology or process that minimizes production cost and makes the company cost competitive, coming up with a production plan that maximizes the utilization of the company's production facilities, and lastly, identifying adequate and cheap raw material suppliers. Take note, for anything that deals with how the product is made, involving the cost in the making of the product, the vice president for production sees to it that everything is done smoothly or done well. Or else, the company might have just been spending too much for a product not worth the cost. However, we also focus on this one. Cheap raw material suppliers. Just because they're cheap does not necessarily follow that the materials found by the Vice President for Production or the suppliers from whom these materials have already can be retrieved will not be able to meet the standards set by the company. This is where the Vice President for Production comes in to make sure that even if the products, materials, that even if the raw materials are cheap, they are still worth using and worth the pay. Of course, you would not expect all of these companies to go with very expensive raw materials, because it would also follow that by the time the product has been made, the selling price of it will be at a higher price that perhaps only a few can avail. So they go with cheaper materials so as to cater to a bigger market. And these raw materials should prove themselves to be adequate enough. You have the Vice President for Administration as the next Vice President. Responsibilities include coordinating the functions of administration, finance, and marketing departments, assisting other departments in hiring employees, providing assistance in payroll preparation, payment of vendors, and collection of receivables, determining the location and the maximum amount of office space needed by the company. More or less, they cover quite a broader job. I mean, they go into finance. The VP for admin also considers marketing departments. The human resource department is also within the VP for admin. In terms of payroll, paychecks, receivables, that's also a consideration for the admin, as well as the space that the company needs, the location of that particular business. These are within the scope of the Vice President's responsibilities. The Vice President for Finance of the financial or the financial manager. Functions include financing, investing, operating, and dividend policies. Financing decisions there include making decisions on how to fund long-term investments. For instance, the company goes for an expansion. Long-term investments and working capital, which deals with the day-to-day operations of the company. These are part of the Vice President for Finance's concerns. Daily cost of operations, as well as long-term investments. So you have fund for long-term investments that the VP for Finance should evaluate, and you also have a working capital, which is a particular amount that will be used on the day-to-day operation of a business. This person determines the appropriate capital structure of the same company. Other than that, the Vice President looks into how much of the total assets has been financed by debt and how much is financed by equity to determine capital structure. So in the accounting equation, it actually is stated as assets equal to assets that which would be equal to liabilities or debt and equity. Assets would pertain to anything and everything that the company owns. Those are what assets would be. And then part of the responsibility of the Vice President for Finance is to see how much of the properties of the company have been financed or purchased, obtained using liabilities or debt, and how much had been financed using capital or equity to determine capital structure. That is where the VP for Finance will be able to discover if more of its assets have been on loans or liabilities, and few have been on the capital coming from the invested amount of shareholders. To be able to acquire assets, our funds must have come somewhere. If it was bought using cash from our pockets, That's being financed by equity. If these assets have been bought from borrowings, using money from borrowings, then that asset is financed by debt. For instance, let's have a concrete example here. You established a cell phone shop. You decided to create a cell phone shop. And then, to create the building, you told yourself, I think I'll invest 250,000 pesos for the creation of that building. That 250,000, as it came from you personally, cash from our pockets would be in a personal cash. The 250,000 there would serve as equity. However, 250,000 wasn't enough. There is still a need for 100,000. So you decided to go for a loan in a bank. You borrowed money from a bank at the price of 100,000. You agreed on the terms of the interest rate. And so you obtained the rest of the 100K. But take note, you had it as a borrowing. You borrowed that amount. So 250 came from equity. 250K came from equity. 100K came from the borrowings in a bank. All for what? To have one property, which is the building. Assets there would be your building. Liability would be the amount that you owe the bank. That's your debt. And then your equity is the 250K that personally came from you. That's your investment. That's your capital for that business. Questions, Nathan and Nicole, regarding assets, equity, and borrowings or debt?
Wala.
Nothing, sir.
The Vice President for Finance also considers investments, which could either be short-term or long-term investments. Short-term investment decisions are needed when the company is in an excess cash position. To plan for this, the financial manager should be able to make use of financial planning tools such as budgeting and forecasting. Moreover, the company should choose which type of investment it should invest that will provide a most optimal risk and return trade-off. So by the time the company decides, the financial manager discovers an excess in cash, it is in the task, in the hands of the financial manager to know how that excess should be utilized. It should be, as suggested, it could go for a short-term investment with optimal risk and return trade-off. Meaning, an optimal risk and return trade-off would tell you that the risk of not getting a good return is low. Again, the risk of not getting a good return is low. In other words, the chances of having a good return should be high. So that's for short-term investments. Long-term investments should be supported by a capital budgeting analysis, which is among the responsibilities of the finance manager. Capital budgeting analysis is a tool to assess whether the investment will be profitable in the long run. This is a crucial function of the management, especially if this investment would be financed by debt. Lenders should have the confidence that the investments that management will push through will be profitable, or else they would not lend the company any money. Lenders, in fact, later on, we'll talk about, it's not here, but it's, I think, in accounting, in Funda, that will talk of lenders as external users. They have to know how well the business is in order for them to make their decision of whether they should invest or not, or they should provide the money that the company would like to lend from them. Because if they just grant the lending and that it turns out the company is not fluid enough to pay for the amount that was borrowed, then the lenders would feel that they're really at a loss. The Vice President for Finance provides these information or helps in crafting these information to be given to the lenders. Operating decisions deal with the daily operations of the company. The Vice President for Finance also looks into this. The role of the VP for Finance is determining how to finance working capital accounts, such as accounts receivable and inventories. Remember, working capital, it's the capital that you use on the daily operation. So the Vice President for Finance must not ignore it. The company has a choice on whether to finance working capital needs by long-term or short-term sources. What must be considered regarding these operating decisions? You have short-term sources, suppliers credit, long-term source, and long-term sources. Cash dividends are paid by corporations to existing shareholders based on their shareholdings in the company as a return on their investment. If you have more shares in a corporation, you should expect that you have a great number or a great total, a great sum of cash dividends. If your share is not as high as the others, then of course your cash dividends would be limited only to the number of heads that you have purchased, or the number of shares that you've purchased in that corporation. Some investors buy stocks because of the dividends they expect to receive from the company. This is really true. That is why the stock market is one that people would watch over from time to time. There are even others who have really earned quite much just by how do I put it? They would really watch over the stock market and would not leave the scene because they're waiting for the perfect moment to get from a particular company the right pricing for a particular stock or shares of stocks. And once they could buy them, they have already presumed the dividends that they could expect to receive from the company selling the stocks. Non-declaration of dividends may disappoint these investors. That is why in a year, the division of dividend or the giving of cash dividends is one that these investors happens to also look forward to. Hence, it is the role of a financial manager to determine when the company should declare cash dividends. You have the conditions to consider before a company declares cash dividends. The company must have enough retained earnings or accumulated profits to support cash dividend declaration. Of course, it would be totally useless if you don't have profit and then you have decided to divide, to share among the investors the cash dividends. See, the company must have cash. Since the dividends are in the form of cash, it's just imperative that the company must really have cash to be declared as dividends to be shared to the shareholders or investors. What is this? One of the functions of finance manager is investing, and its available cash may be used to invest in long-term investments. Some small enterprises which are undergoing expansion may have limited access to long-term financing. This results to these small companies reinvesting their earnings into their business rather than paying them out as dividends. Instead of dividing the remaining cash, they will just reinvest them into the business. This happens for those which have limited access to cash or limited access to amounts that could be divided or shared as cash dividends. It's to choose between dividing it as cash dividends or using it for undergoing expansions or continual operations. Some corporations would rather choose to reinvest the amount so that the business can continue its operations. It would sound quite selfish if the investor would still insist, I'll get my share and I could, because if it's for the purpose of the company or for the purpose of maximizing one's wealth, logic would say it's not yet the right time to get the cash dividend. Logic is supposed to tell the investor that it should still be reinvested so that when the right time comes, a better or a more or a bigger share for cash dividends can be enjoyed by the investors. For companies which have limited access to capital and have target capital structure, they may end up with a residual dividend policy. This means that when companies are faced with investment opportunities, internally generated funds will be used first to finance these investments, and dividends can only be declared if there are excess funds. This is also possible. In the event that there's quite a limit, or it's quite limited when it comes to access to capital and capital, the residual dividend policy would rather tell them that internally generated funds will be used as investments, and if there is an excess, internally generated funds are those that are invested by the investors, the money that really comes from them. This is outside of the profit. This is outside of the profit that the company supposedly earns. So we have internally generated funds, which will continually serve as investments. And in the event that there is an excess from these internally generated funds, dividends can be declared only if there is an excess. But the problem is, it might lead to a situation when there's none. Take note, these are companies which have limited access to capital. They don't have the luxury of capital or cash to be shared among themselves. In fact, that's the reason why they are just relying on internally generated funds to finance investments involving expansions or continuity of operations. On the other hand, a company which has access to long-term sources of funds may be able to declare dividends even if they are faced with investment opportunities. However, these investment opportunities are generally financed by both debt and equity. So it still comes out that even if investment opportunities come and that they've decided to declare dividends, these investment opportunities will come into a combination of liabilities, debts, and capital, equity, coming from investors. So, wait. There you have it. The corporate organization structure and investments. Questions, Nathan, Nicole? Are you sure? Please point out questions. I think it's I can't also blame you if this one is something that we can't really really relate so much, because in the nature of the businesses that you have, I think they're not on a corporate structure. Nicole,
Yes.
no? Your business, Nicole, is not corporate type, as well as yours,
Yes,
Nathan.
sir.
Sir.
But this is an orientation for us the moment we go with an expansion of our business. Who knows, Nicole? Yeah, let us not deprive ourselves of the possibility that perhaps in the years to come, your store, Nicole, will become a bigger supermarket. Diba? And that supermarket can't just be run by one or two people. It might need to proceed to a corporate structure. In your case, Nathan, initially you will have started with something quite small. I think that's an online business, Nathan, no?
Yes.
Something quite small, but then later on you found people who are willing to work with you on it. have granted you the chance to expand it, and then you now become a shareholder or a board of director, member of the board of directors. And then you hire someone who will serve as the president, and you'll eventually have your VPs. These many big companies that we have right now started small. They started small. Alturas before was such a very small store. I don't know if you've known of Boy Lure. That's true, else no. That's what I've been told by my aunts, that before Alturas was a mall, it was such a very small store, like Boy Lure. It's Boy Lure is a very it's a it's I think it's also a retailer, but it's not as big as Shopper Smart. Yeah, it's way smaller than Shopper Smart. But the owners of Alturas did not stop themselves from the idea of expansions. Oh, diba? They went into expansions. For sure, when they decided to expand, when that time came for them to expand, they agreed that it's impractical to go with cash dividends right away. Why don't we use these cash dividends altogether for the purpose of expanding the business? Anyway, by the time our business will have expanded or gotten bigger, we'll be enjoying better dividends later on. And that's really what happened. And it continues up until now. And who knows, Nicole, you just might be the first to have its own bigger supermarket there in your place in, is that already in, I think that's not yet in Panglao. That's in Dao, no?
San Isidro, sir.
Oh, Nicole, diba? You might be the first to have one in San Isidro. Why would you laugh at it?
Nothing, sir.
Would you rather stop? If I were to ask you now, would you want that your store remain the same?
No, sir. Of course not.
What is your wish for your store? What is your dream for your store?
Ano, sir? It will be bigger. Charot.
And that's all right. That's a good direction, that you have already placed that as a plan, that that your store becomes bigger.
We're planning to have ano, sir, yung wholesale.
See, it's good. It's
Yeah.
good. It's really good. You are now planning for a wholesale, and that's a very big plan. And yes, it doesn't. It must not just even stop there.
Yes, sir.
For sure, Raisa could relate to this as well. I mean, their
Yeah,
store,
so,
for their store, things did not turn out to be like that right away. They started small. BQ Mall started quite a small store, and then eventually they grew bigger. Now they're in a corporate structure. They have shareholders, they have a board of directors. There's one whom they call the CEO or president, and they have VPs, vice presidents, to assist to help the president in the operation of the business. This is not also to say that the shareholders are just simply there because of the investment that they provided. No. When they are called shareholders, it doesn't mean that they could care less of how it's operation of how it's operate how the business is operated, and that all the while they're just simply after of the profit. No. The shareholders make sure, as they're the ones superseeing everything, they're really at the top of the food chain here. They make sure that things go according to the direction of the business. If the board of directors conducts a meeting among themselves from time to time for this purpose, then you can expect the shareholders to also hold meetings relative to the business that's being operated. Like what I also said, there are also shareholders who have decided to become members of the board of directors. I think IA works that way, Ma'am, else, no? And then um, Ma'am Zen and Sir Joe are shareholders, and they're also members of the board of directors. So IA also works that way. Since IA is of a corporate structure, so we have the names of Sir Joe and Ma'am Zen as shareholders. At the same time, they're also members of the board of directors. It's possible. In some cases, they would really set the board of directors apart from the shareholders, or that the shareholders would set themselves apart from the board of directors. This is also to minimize chances of having conflicts of interest. All the more when it comes to the president. As much as possible, they would not want the president to be a part of the board of directors. But in the case of IA, Ma'am Els, who is the president? Ma'am Zeno. There's so much power here. Or that there are just few. Family, no? The case in IA is that it's on a family basis. Like so many, if not all, and the shareholders and board of directors are related by blood. Ma'am Rose Baguio, so still related by blood to Sergio. So it's quite and that's also a good thing, because that's more or less an assurance that since they know each other, or they know each other very well, so they have invested trust on the people that they have placed in these particular positions, be them a shareholder, a board of director, or a president. Yes, Nathan, there's something you'd like to share?
No, sir.
Are you now a board of director as well, Nathan?
Di pa, sir.
A board member, someone who erases the writings on the board. So let's now proceed to your Edmodo class to answer a few questions, just a few questions. Have you now opened your Edmodo page? The purpose of these would also be to do some sharing of information. There, I've placed one question there. The question is, in a corporate structure, why is there still a need to have a CEO when the board of directors is already created? Go. I have placed another question. The question is, why should corporate organizations consider an expansion or an additional investment opportunity? An additional investment opportunity is one, like the term itself, another area which they could invest in. Like for instance, they have a building, they have building one, you're making a funeral home, or you are running a funeral home. An investment opportunity there is, maybe we can branch out in another municipality. Let's have the name of our funeral home, but now located identified as a branch office. That's another investment opportunity, which can also be labeled as an expansion. Wait, don't you have a copy of the module for business finance?
Wala, sir.
Haha.
Wala po.
The one that we are using now, this one. The one with this diagram.
Wala gid
Wala
sir.
po, sir.
Huh? But I gave a copy of the notes.
Physics lang, sir. Sir, may physics kami.
P6 yun, sir. P6.
Physics, sir.
How
May
come
physics
I gave a
kami.
copy of the module last week?
Baka sa iba binigay, sir.
No, your notes, your module is labeled as grade 12 ABM, Business Finance.
P6 yun, sir. P6.
Physics naman yung nandito, sir. Physics.
I think Sir Joe mistakenly misplaced our module.
What the?
Ask ko no, sir.
See, your module, I'll share screen to you the module, ha? Can the both of you see this now?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
This is
sir.
how your module looks like, oh.
Wala lagi, sir.
The diagram is here. See? They're all there.
No,
We don't have, sir.
How can that be?
Ask Sir Joe, sir. I think Sir Joe is the one putting it.
Oh, okay, okay. I'll send the notes now through Edmodo.
Ah, sir. No, so English even. Then there's some others.
I am now sending it as an attachment in Edmodo, ha?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I did not know this. I really thought that you've already been given your modules. What about for fundamentals of accounting?
Yes, sir. There is.
Have you received the module for fundamentals of accounting?
yes,
Yes,
sir.
Oh, see? How can that be? Okay, I've already placed the document as an attachment and I posted it in our wall.